in the 21st century. Hard-working people working hard for you and me. Moving higher, time and time again. Through the years you'll find us here. Moving higher.
Hello and welcome to Moving Iron Podcast Tax News with Glen Birnbaum. Glen is a CPA in East Peoria, Illinois, and is with Heinel Banhort. And this edition of the Moving Iron Podcast is brought to you by Dawson Tire and Wheel, your premier ag tire and wheel provider in North America, helping people grow, and TractorZoom, delivering insights. Also, Dry Shod Boots, the official work boot of the Moving Iron Podcast. So, Glen, how you doing this morning, man?
Not too bad, Casey.
Glen has a daily spot here in the Moving Iron Podcast here in the last about a couple weeks here. That with all this tax stuff that's going on and all the legislation that's coming out, there's a lot of information that is coming out of Washington right now, and different stimulus packages and just all kinds of great stuff for going on. So, Glen, you had a whole laundry list of stuff come out that you want to talk about before we got going, and I got writer's cramp trying to get all that stuff written down before you had it all come out. But let's kick off here a little bit.
I've got the whole 880-page bill.
Oh, okay, so we got plenty.
This
is endless amount of time, so don't worry about it. We can go page by page. It's amazing to have 888 pages or whatever it is for a bill that's just supposed to be delivering a few $1,000s just to the American people, but somehow they got to get 800 and some pages out of that. But that's another debate for another time. But let's start here a little bit. So one thing you brought up, there's two things you brought up that I really want to spend some time on, and obviously we'll hit some other things too. But the biggest one is employment taxes and how that's going to work. So basically, you're saying there's a half now, half later, or half later and half even later kind of approach to how they're going to pay that. So talk about that a little bit, and then how that works out in this bill.
Yeah, and so we should timestamp this. This is about 8:30 a.m. on Thursday now, and we are trying to give general advice here. Obviously, always talk to your tax advisor on these things. We're trying to hopefully give just some ideas, some thoughts to your listeners. But you should always verify this with your specific tax situation. So. Okay, so yes, there is a delay in the employer payroll tax for 2020. So our understanding is the 6.2% Social Security tax. Now this is just the employer side, would not be due. So any Social Security tax through December 31st of 2020, you do not have to remit that. Typically, you got to remit that, every week or every month or whatever, depending on your payroll and stuff. But you'd be able to pay half of it, 50% of it by December 31st of 2021, and the other half by December 31st of 2022. So that's what you said, later and even later, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I've got 18 months starting today. I have 18 months to make my pay half of my 2020 employment tax, and I have basically another 12 months on top of that to get there. So 36 months later, I've paid my 2020 employment taxes.
Yeah. Now, we'll see how the forms work, but how this exactly works, but they'll have to deal with all this. But yeah, that's what it looks like in the bill. And this is the other thing is the Senate did pass the bill overnight. I believe it was 96-0. Everyone's expectation is the House will vote on it for sure by tomorrow, and so we're assuming this is law. So yeah, this employer payroll tax, this 6.2%, also would apply to self-employed individuals as well. So, but again, it's only the employer share. So when you're self-employed, right, you're paying for both sides. So it's a little bit complex, but obviously, hopefully there'll be a lot more guidance. But you'd have the same kind of concept as you wouldn't have to, next April of 2021, you wouldn't have to pay all of your self-employment tax. Is what it's looking like. But so again, there'll be more guidance, but in effect, it's kind of an interest-free loan from the government on 6.2% of your payroll.
That's a big deal, man. That's for a lot of people. That's a very big deal. So The other one I want to talk to you a little bit about too was the SBA loans and what they have going on there. So it looks like there's going to be some deferment of payments out there a little bit, and then there's another program out there where if you do the right things, it's forgiven. I guess is kind of what I'm reading here. So give us a little background on that.
This is, in my mind, probably the most important thing for small businesses that's in the bill. Hasn't got just a ton of press, but it's really an expansion to an existing SBA loan program, Small Business Administration, Section 7A, if you want the technical code section there in the SBA. So it's just an expansion of this, but it expands it by about $350 billion. And basically it allows for small businesses to be able to get a loan from, really it's from a bank, but the SBA or the government is guaranteeing 100% of it. So I believe typically the government will back 85% of the loan, but in this case they're going to back 100% of it. So this is more from the bank's perspective here, that it's 100% guaranteed by the government. But banks are familiar with doing these loans. They generally have specialists that do SBA loans. So I think the thought process here is that the money can get out pretty quick, because it's not under the I believe it's Section 7B is like the disaster relief kind of SBA loans. That's kind of a different animal. This is more of the traditional kind of bread and butter Section 7A loans. So basically, there are some limitations. You generally got to have under 500 employees, full-time equivalent employees, although there are exceptions to that. It does apply to sole proprietors as well. It applies to for-profit businesses. It also looks to me like it applies to nonprofit businesses like your 501c3 organizations. So it's really pretty broad, and it's one of the certifications is that there's uncertainty of economic conditions in your business, and it makes necessary to get this money. So it's kind of a fairly generic requirement. Now, the one thing that was put into the bill in the last 2 days, they put in a little section that kind of is the banks are supposed to give priority to certain types of small businesses. Okay. This, so kind of what I said before was what was in the bill, the 500 and that. But now there's even a narrower scope to this, although it's just guidance. It's just like give priority to these types of businesses. So what are they? The first one, underserved and rural markets. Okay. So I think this was fought for pretty hard to try to get something more for the rural areas, the underserved areas. So that's one of them. Give priority to veterans in the military, to socially and economically disadvantaged business owners, or I think you maybe could interpret that just to employees that are in that business. Women is also in there, and then it also says businesses that are in operation less than 2 years. So the question in my mind is how narrow does this scope it? Again, since I've been following it, I know that this was not in the bill originally, so they have narrowed it to some degree, but the rural markets are still in there. But it's just a matter of how the bank or the SBA monitors this. But that's kind of who's eligible for this program. Okay.
Yeah, there's the rural America thing. That's going to be a big boost to some of these folks, especially with what we're seeing happen right now. I mean, there's a lot of these little businesses in these little bitty towns are struggling just because of the whole stay-at-home thing and everything else that we got going on. So that'll be
here's one other thing, just to kind of piggyback on that, is originally the bill, this is the bank would get like a 5% fee for doing this loan, no matter the loan size. That was what the bill was originally. Now the bill that passed last night, it says it's 5% fee for a loan up to $350,000. Okay. Now then, when you go from a loan from $350,000 to $2 million, the fee drops to 3%. So again, presumably the bank would be less inclined to do that, possibly if they've got sufficient loan demand. And then for any loan over $2 million, the fee drops to 1%. So again, in trying to encourage loans of $350,000 or less would be my take on it.
Yeah.
But it is more paperwork, right? If you got to do 10 loans or 10 loans at $350,000 or just one loan at $3.5 million, but they are trying to really make it applicable to smaller businesses.
Right on. Okay. All right, so you got 800 pages there in front of you, Glenn, and you spent all night reading that so you could be prepared for the Moving Iron podcast here. But what else is out there that you think is worth mentioning here?
Yeah, well, let's keep talking about the SBA because this is we've just talked about eligibility, and so now how big of a loan can I get, or what's this mean? Basically, you can look at your average monthly payroll cost for like the last 12 months. And payroll is defined, of course, and we're still trying to parse through the details, but it looks like it's wages, health insurance, retirement. It would not be like the federal payroll taxes. It does not appear. But it's basically your average monthly payroll cost times 2.5. Okay. So if you just simplify, and this is dangerous when you do this, but if a month has 4 weeks, right? If you take that times 2.5, I believe that's 10 weeks.
Right.
So basically your maximum loan amount is kind of 10 weeks of your payroll. Okay. So that's your maximum loan amount. There is an overall cap of $10 million, but that probably won't come into play very often given the scope of this. So, and people making over 100,000 in salary don't once you go over 100,000, it doesn't count towards that number. Okay. So 10 weeks of your payroll is effectively funded by this loan if you can get it. Okay. So now what are the other terms? There's no personal guarantees. The loan is entirely non-recourse. There's a typical requirement that the business is unable to obtain credit elsewhere. That's typically what's part of the SBA loan. That part of the act is waived, so you don't, that does not come into play. So that's going to be easier to get the loan. It looks like it's a 10-year maturity. The maximum interest rate is 4%. You don't have to make any payments for at least 6 months on this loan. And so that's interesting. And then if you do prepay it, typically there's a prepayment penalty on an SBA loan. There's no prepayment penalty either. So that's kind of the gist of this. But we're saving the biggest part here for last. And you touched on it. Is there's this forgiveness concept? Is that the loan can be forgiven in certain circumstances, and that's really the big deal here. You kind of like getting a loan forgiven, right, Casey?
I love that. Yeah, that's great. So, forgive all my loans. It'd be great.
There you go. Okay, so what you do then is there's several things here, but you look at basically you look at the 8 week period after you get the loan. That's kind of your testing period here to see, did you spend the money properly? And so you look at 8 weeks. Now you might think, well, wait a minute, if my loan is based on kind of 10 weeks of payroll and only have 8 weeks to spend it, right, I probably won't get all of my loan forgiven. That would maybe only 80% is going to get forgiven. Well, what they threw in is they start with payroll costs during that 8 week period, post closing of the loan, but then you get to add in things like interest on existing debt, debt that was there before you borrowed this money, rent and utilities, which would include like internet and different things like that. So the bottom line is they throw a lot more things into that 8 week period. And so probably, in a lot of cases, the loan could potentially be 100% forgiven due to the mechanics. So that's this, this is a $350 billion program. It's designed, I believe, to get money quickly to small businesses. The banks are going to be, I think, kind of, they're going to get hit a lot with requests on this. And then, it does say this, if it is forgiven, it's income tax free. You don't typically on debt, so there's different rules around this, but sometimes if you get, loans forgiven, you have to actually pick that up as income. But in this case, it's to be tax free.
Okay. So you just talked about a few things that in that 8 week period, which you could spend it on, interest, on existing debt, rent, utilities, payroll tax or payroll. Obviously, that's kind of what this is geared toward to kind of make sure that's going. Is there anything else that you could spend that money on besides what you've got, what you've already mentioned?
Not that I'm aware of. No. And so again, it's just.
Is it just for that? Then is that just what they're wanting you to spend it on?
Yeah, and again, this is the test for it to be forgiven, right? So if you don't have quite enough cost, then it just kind of converts to a original, a traditional loan at that time. But if you want it to be 100% forgiven, you've got to spend it on these things. And then there's going to be documentation, and you're going to have to provide canceled checks and all sorts of things. So now there is one other part of this, which is the reason it passed, is that there's a requirement that so let's say you did spend all the money properly, in that 8-week period. You also then have to keep people employed through June 30th. And there's different calculations of what your reference period is, but you look at like your number of full-time employees. But the bottom line is the point of this is to keep people on your payroll, right? Because obviously if you get an interest-free loan, and even better, it's forgiven, they want you to keep these people on payroll. So that is part of it, and it's through June 30th right now. So, could that change later on? Possibly, and there's special rules in there about rehiring people. I think there's something about if maybe you did have to lay somebody off because of customer demand, but maybe if you rehire them back by June 30th, it might work. So there's a lot of criteria in there, but the concept is you keep these people on your payroll, and you'll get this loan, and I said interest free. I mean, it's technically it has an interest rate 4%. You don't have to make any payments for 6 months at least. But then if you spend it properly, then it'll be forgiven. So
okay.
So this is a really big deal on the SBA side. The other thing that I just was reading the bill this morning, if businesses that I'm sure some of your listeners have an existing small business administration loan already, it appears that, and again, check, your lender, check with them once this bill becomes law, but it appears that you may not have to make any payments on that existing SBA loan for a period of 6 months. So that could be helpful too. Again, we'll get all this clarity, but that's what it appears to be my read of the bill.
That's some good stuff, man. There's a good opportunity for some people to really take advantage of this and kind of get a leg up, especially if they're struggling right now to keep things rolling.
Yeah, for sure.
So what else is in that bill that you want to talk about?
Yeah, so let's talk a little more specifically. We've touched on it. There's going to be these individual stimulus payments. And right now, what the text is showing is it's going to be $1,200 per person. So, it'd be $2,400 if married. And then you'd get $500 for each child under the age of 17.
Okay.
It's based on your 20. This gets kind of confusing. It could either be based on your 2018 or 2019 income, but it'll ultimately be actually based on your 2020 taxable income. And there are some phase outs of eligibility. Once you start going over about $75,000 for single and $150,000 for married, it starts getting phased out. But there's even different thresholds depending on how it works. So if you don't have kids, I believe it would phase out once you're at like $198,000 for married. If you do have, like, say, a couple kids, I think it could be, more like $218,000. So we're still working through some of the math on this, but the bottom line is $1,200 per person, $500 per child under age 17.
Okay.
All right.
So I've got my wife and just hypothetically my wife and my 3 kids. So I'm going to get $4,500.
I think that sounds right. Yeah, and it should come through, your direct deposit, if you do have a direct deposit, if the IRS has your banking account information, they would send it that way. Otherwise, they'll have to write checks. So,
well, that'd be cool. I get an incoming instead of an outgoing to the IRS. That's cool. That'll be a first time, Glenn.
There you go. So
all kinds of firsts here.
That's definitely a big deal. I think it's being estimated at about $500 billion. So I said $350 billion for those small businesses.
Yeah,
this is about $500 billion, I believe. I don't know how they actually compute this, but I guess they can do it. So yeah, that's a big deal. We did talk about the fact that you are able to pull out $100,000 out of your retirement account penalty free. If you got to be 59 and a half, or you get a 10% penalty. Okay. Typically now they're going to waive that. So you can take out $100,000 in 2020 free from penalty. And then you can, so you still have to pay income tax on it, but then you can either, you have the ability to basically pay it back, I think over like a 3-year period, or if you don't pay it back, you pay the income tax over a 3-year period.
Okay.
So again, kind of spreading that out.
Giving you a chance to use it, but not.
So that's pretty important. The other thing is, we didn't talk about this last time, the required minimum distribution. If you're over age 70 and a half, now I think it's going to be age 72 with a law they just passed not too long ago, but you've got to pull money out of your retirement account, right? Every year. They're going to not make that a requirement for 2020. So you do not have to pull money out of your retirement account. And I think the idea there is, right, if the balance in your account's down, it's kind of forcing you to sell out, I guess.
Right.
So anyway, that's something. They did put in a $300 above the line charitable donation. So even if you don't itemize, you can, deduct $300 for charities. Whereas before it might take, say $10,000 or $15,000 of charitable deductions, depending on what else you had going on. In order to benefit, now basically everyone can get a $300 kind of above the line deduction. That's for 2020 and beyond. So that'll be something. So it's kind of a little bit like the teacher. If you're familiar with, there's the teacher deduction of $250. If you a lot of teachers spend their own money on supplies and things for the students, you can deduct $250 above the line. This is a $300 deduction for donations.
Okay. Right on.
There's something about if employers are actually able to pay off employee student loan debt to the tune of about $5,000, and it would be tax free. So that's a new provision.
Say that again. So one more time on that one.
An employer can pay off an employee's student loan debt, kind of pay it on their behalf, in effect, and up to $5,250, and it's not treated as taxable income
to the employee.
Yeah.
Does the employer get some kind of? They can write it off on their taxes, I guess.
Yeah, they should be able to write it off. There was I'm not sure I knew this. There was something that said that you can pay, a certain amount of money. Employers can pay money, right, for continuing education, or more of like, say you want to get a master's degree or something. Mm-hmm. And so that it kind of piggybacks on that rule. And I think you may have to look at those combined. So.
Gotcha.
So that's that. There's some rules about net operating losses now that if you lose money, in 2019 here, or in last year, or in 2020, this year, you can actually now carry those back and get money back in prior years. And it looks like you can actually carry it back for up to 5 years. And and I believe, it's also 2018 losses. So for some reason you had 2018. So farmers, if you remember, and you shouldn't remember this, but farmers had a 5-year carryback rule, and then everyone else was a 2-year carryback rule. Historically, well, the tax reform kind of changed that and pretty much said you can't carry back a loss anymore, except for farmers. So this is really putting everybody back to what farmers had a few years ago. So you can carry back a loss 5 years and get tax back.
Well, that's cool.
So
yeah.
So there's another little rule dealing with losses. And then we've touched on a little bit the interest limitation rule where, and again, this generally applies to bigger businesses, but basically you were not able to deduct all of your interest. Although this did apply remember we talked about what a farm equipment dealership or car dealership had application there was pretty significant. 30% of your earnings before interest, taxes, and depreciation, or EBITDA, you could only deduct interest to that point. Now they're saying we're going to make that 50% of EBITDA, so allow you to deduct more of the interest. There is a special rule, and this does apply to 2019. There is a special rule for partnerships, though, where it really doesn't impact your 2019 return, but it becomes a benefit in 2020 dealing with a carryover rule. So kind of tricky. But those are probably the main kind of tax highlights. Again, a lot of those we kind of at least touched on in some past podcasts, but it's just nice to see it in the 880-page bill.
Right on. Good stuff. Well, Glenn, like always, man, you're out there getting after it every day, watching over this tax stuff for us here. So if folks want to reach out to you and get some more clarification on what's going on here, or just have a general question about what's going on with everything else in the world, what's the best way to get hold of you, Glenn?
Yeah, it's best to call our office at Heinold Banward. It's 309-694-4251. If you call and ask for me, it'll ring to my cell phone. I'm working from home as are most of our people. But yeah, just give us a phone call. We'd be happy to chat. We're looking at this for a lot of our clients, and otherwise, you can always look me up on Twitter at Glen Birnbaum is my handle.
Right on. Well, Glen Birnbaum, the tax watchdog. That's his new name now. So
there you go.
He's out there getting after it, and make sure you check him out on his Twitter page. There's a lot of good information that comes out there with the rest of the tax guys that pop in there and chime in on what he's got to say. So, Glenn, thanks for being on the podcast, man.
All right, Casey, thank you.
All right, I'm Casey Seymour. Make sure you check me out on movingironllc.com. Also, all my social media pages out there, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Moving Iron LLC. Check out the Global Ag Network and all the people that are podcasters on that. And also just kind of carry this stuff around with you folks. I know there's a lot of stuff going on. A lot of things are up in the air, and the economy is all going 100 miles an hour in all different directions. But we're going to come through this, and we're going to be good, and the market's going to come back, and everybody's going to be good again. So keep that in mind as we get through this trying period here. But until next time, I'm Casey Seymour with Glen Birnbaum. Let's go move some iron, folks. Out.
Moving higher in the 21st century. Hard-working people working hard for you and me. Moving higher, time and time again. Through the years you'll find us here. Moving higher.